And welcome to episode 9 of the Relocrazy podcast. I have a special guest today. His name is Robert Maisel, and he's a blogger, author, intercultural trainer, and also a global mobility expert. And he has lots of expat experience, and he's been traveling the world for much longer than I have. And I'm really excited to talk to him as well because he's a fellow American who likes to travel, and I think that's really cool. So, Robert, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Well, Victoria, thanks so much for having me on your show. I'm honored to be here. You did quite a good job explaining who I am, so I don't know how much I'm going to add. But as you said, just passionate traveler, avid language learner would be something else to add. Super just interested in cultures, people, and have basically found ways to mix my personal and professional worlds using these passions, if you will.
Yeah. It's funny that you say that because I think everyone knows my story by now. I'm an American expat living in Berlin. So when I first started looking for jobs in Germany and I applied for a position to work in this immigration law firm, back then I didn't even know what global mobility was. I didn't know you could help expats move around or help internationals with different things. So once you get into it and you're in it, you're like, oh, this is the job I would have created for myself if I didn't know it existed, back then. So I think that's a cool thing about people who are interested in languages and cultures is that the global mobility world exists for us.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because, as you said, a lot of people who, before they get into mobility or global mobility, if you will, they may have never heard that term. Before I got into it, I also didn't know exactly quite what that meant.
Yeah, that's funny. And I think some of the people I've interviewed in the past, some of the people who have been in the industry like uh, 20 years longer than we have, some of them even said like the one contact from Sweden, I think she said that she thought that she had invented global mobility because it didn't, it existed, but I think only in the US, and they were using it a lot for military families and household goods and stuff like that. And that's where it all got started. But she was one of the first people to start in her country doing that before, it got global. So yeah, I think some people who got into it in the beginning, it was so new that they were kind of the founders of global mobility, even in their own countries, which I think is also really, really cool.
Yeah, that's neat.
Yeah, very good. So I'm going to start with the most current events topic because I'm also from New York. I'm from New York State, and whoever's listening and doesn't know, the governor of New York has been handling the COVID situation very well. At least it looks like he's been handling it very well. Governor Cuomo. And I'm just wondering what your life is like living in New York City during the COVID situation.
Sure. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to address the audience about this topic because it is pretty relevant now. We're all in this. And so just to start, New York State is a bit more open than New York City right now is. New York City, as of just yesterday, went into phase 1 of reopening.
Oh, wow.
And what that means is essentially construction business and certain aspects of retail, not really the type that you would think of like bookstores or an electronic store. So it's still very limited in what's open.
Mm-hmm.
Phase 2 is when we would see like barbershops, more commonly known retail stores reopening. But at this phase, New York City has just entered phase 1, still pretty closed off. But it's been quite a shift here in lifestyle. A lot of Zoom meetings, a lot of less social interaction, much less than I'm used to.
Yeah, I think I mean, obviously, I still have friends and family in upstate New York, and most of my friends were participating in normal social distancing. And I know in upstate New York, they made it to phase 2 last week, I think. So
Yeah.
some of my friends started going back to work. But yeah, things definitely changed a lot for New York, and I can't imagine how New York City will be like if it is completely shut down. That's crazy.
You know, it's nothing I've ever seen in my lifetime. It's one of those
Yeah.
things where people know New York City to be sort of this epicenter, this world financial center, the most populous city in the United States, and so it has a reputation for all these things. And then when I'm now experiencing a New York City that has barren streets in the East
Hmm.
Village, and you know, not completely, but much more quiet than it normally is, less people. It's eerie a bit. It's strange, but there is an element that's nice because you're able to experience the crazy, chaotic, hectic city that in more quiet and peaceful terms, which no one has ever had the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, I think as well, like in Berlin, I have the opportunity to live in kind of a district where there are a lot less tourists, and I love that about the city. But it's also cool now to go in some of the more touristic parts of the city, and there are no tourists. I mean, I love internationals and I love helping them, but you know, when there are a lot of tourists in places, you know, it's a different vibe. So I think, yeah, getting to know your city in a different level because of a poor situation is also kind of nice, especially in a city like New York City where it's hard to get your peace sometimes.
Right. And it's even affected things like, well, certainly the restaurant business, but to the point where some restaurants may be open, but it's like a continuous checking process because there was one right around me, for example, we would go to, and then it's when COVID started, it was open. And then a couple weeks in, they decided to close their doors. So restaurants are making their own decisions and
Hmm.
what they're going to do, if they're going to stay open or not.
Yeah. I think it's just a reminder as well to us to support the local small businesses. We're trying our best as well. We
Yes.
ordered takeout from a couple of the food trucks a month ago, because I started a delivery service, and one of the local bars that we sometimes go to, the owner is actually Canadian, and I'm not super close with him, but we're really good friends. Like we've uh, since he opened his business, I always try to support him because I think it's so cool that someone who doesn't speak any German came to Berlin and started a business. And I always talk to him about, you know, how his business going and how he really created like a community in his bar. And I've been watching him do this for almost 2 years now, and then suddenly had to close the doors of the bar. But he came up with a completely new concept. They were selling tacos like out of the window of the bar, and completely revamped so they were selling tapas before. They have a Portuguese chef, and they were doing some kind of tapas, and people came and they nibbled. But now he's actually making a lot of money selling food, because he changed over to tacos and has a completely different concept. So I think that applies not only to restaurants, but it applies to the global mobility as well, because we have to reinvent what we're selling and how we're selling it. So I think it's cool to see how small businesses are, changing the way they're working.
Agreed. I think that's a really cool story. And, you know, um, I've been doing my best to support the local businesses too. Anyone who
Yeah.
knows me knows I love bagels and coffee. So I'll be going
Oh
to make sure to
yeah.
support those guys, and just tipping a lot more than I normally would for like a takeout
Yeah.
service. I usually wouldn't, you know, we would tip for like a sit down service, but I've been tipping more than I even would normally because I know everybody's going through hard times right now and I want to support where I can.
Definitely. That's a good point as well. Okay, so we can move away from COVID because it can be depressing,
Right,
even
right.
though we had positive points.
We
So
did.
I talked to you already last week, and I know a little bit about your own expat experiences, and I would love to know more about your expat experiences.
Sure. So, really, well, traveled all over the world, but if we're going to talk about where I've actually lived abroad, two main pieces of this. One is Buenos Aires, Argentina, and that was for my semester abroad during college. I was a Spanish major. And the other significant chunk of time was for 3 years in Tokyo, Japan, where I lived and worked and taught English.
Wow, that's really cool. And so, when you went to Buenos Aires, you were still in college. You're a student.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. And I feel like if you go to Buenos Aires, then because it's a country that where like not a lot of people speak English, you definitely probably had a lot of active experiences with the language and actually a chance to use the language and learn more, right?
Oh, yeah. So, awesome story about that. I Well, first off, I lived with a host family, which was a wonderful experience.
Oh, that's so
Really,
cool.
yeah, really great way to immerse yourself in the culture, the language, even little nuances from seeing what the family eats at night, how the family eats, what time the family eats. All these things are really cool and very different than to what we do here in New York. And so, yes, I had a lot of exposure to the language. And I realized when I got down there, I had studied Spanish for years. And right out of the textbook, got down there, said, yeah, all right, boom, hit the ground running, ready to go. Got there and didn't really understand anything.
Yeah. Argentinians have their own kind of dialect of or accent. I don't know what you call a dialect or accent, but they do speak a little bit different Spanish than we learn in school for sure.
They definitely do.
So definitely, I can imagine. I mean, I know. What do they do in Argentina? They make with the double L. They make sh, right? It's Argentina.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So a lot of times, a more feminine way of expressing this is like llegué a la playa, right? And then and the masculine way is like yo. So yo llegué wherever you went.
Yeah.
Yeah. So catching
Yeah.
that, like it's a little subtle nuance, but when you are constantly hearing that sound and you're not used to hearing that sound, and at the speed in which the porteños is what they call people from Buenos Aires speak, couple that with
Mm-hmm.
the slang terms that they use, which I was
Yeah.
completely unfamiliar with, and you've got a pretty much like a pretty powerful concoction of items that make it very, very difficult for someone who's learned textbook, predominantly Mexican, partly Spanish, from Spain, Spanish, to
Yeah.
understand what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm glad you had that experience though, because I mean, once you learn a difficult dialect, I think you're more likely to be able to understand easier ones that are more like, I think people from Central America, they speak a little bit more clear Spanish, or at least I understand them better. I have a friend from Costa Rica, for example, or from Panama. So I've definitely found that dialect to be a little bit more easy to understand. And then when it comes to Spain, at first, when I moved to Europe, I didn't really understand anything, but now I've heard that for the last how many years. So yeah, I think once you have those experiences with the other dialects, then it's a little bit more easy to understand. Yeah, basically from any country. That's
Agreed. It's
cool.
kind of like diving in, head first into a huge challenge. When you go for what's most difficult, then sort of the countries that are traditionally known for, as you mentioned, Costa Rica, Chile. I heard also when I was studying abroad, having a sort of more just overall understandable Spanish with
Mm-hmm.
less zings and things. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. And I also just want to point out, I think it's really cool that you studied abroad. I know that a good amount of Americans do study abroad during college. What I wish I would see more of, especially, yeah, as from an exchange perspective, is when I moved to Europe, I met so many Germans who studied abroad in high school for an entire year in the US. And I think it's not very common for Americans to do that, go abroad for a year for high school. And that's something I would definitely, if any parents are listening to this from the States and your kids are interested in language, I would definitely encourage it, because I would say if I had had a year abroad in a Spanish speaking country or a German speaking country, that's what really makes the difference. I mean, um, these kids are immersed in the school system, so they're having to learn and read and write in the language as well. And I think that makes a huge difference when they do go abroad for a longer amount of time, especially when they're that young. It's so much easier for them to pick up on it. And I think it's a pity that I don't hear or see more American kids doing those programs.
yeah, I completely agree with everything you said, Victoria. And it's interesting because we don't really see in high school that many exchanges. We have programs, but it's not very popular. I didn't have any friends who did it. I didn't do it. And once I got to college, when we're considering a semester abroad, for example, even that, it's relatively popular, but it's
Hmm.
definitely not something that the majority of my friends did,
Right.
which is interesting. And that may go back to American values or American culture, and we're just um, it doesn't seem to be as big of a deal
Right.
for students. They're not pushed as hard to go have these international experiences. Fortunate I was a Spanish major, so it really just made sense. And I'm wondering sometimes too if there's the issue of like credits, or sometimes does it fit in with my major, or am
Yeah.
I going to get credit for the classes? Makes sense.
Yeah, I think that
um,
definitely makes sense. And I think a lot of people in the US also try to do internships during the summer, or other positions to try and, get some practical experience. So I can understand why it doesn't always fit in. Um, but I can tell you, I did study abroad in Germany. I did a summer abroad. We did a language course, and with German history classes. It wasn't like a full study abroad. It was a summer program. It was a short one. But that like changed my whole life, because then I became an au pair, and then I kept coming back to Germany, and yeah, I built my whole life here, obviously. So I think It definitely, I mean, we can talk about that more once you talk about your extended stay in Japan. But once you live abroad, you definitely have a whole new set of skills that you don't learn if you always stay in the same country and only speak the same language and don't get to know people from another country. So, um, yeah, I think it's only positive experience I've had with exchange and study abroad programs. And yeah, I wish that that had been offered to me in high school. I don't even ever remember being offered to go abroad or even seeing. I mean, I know what is the one program? I think it's ASIC. I heard of that. And I think that there were students on that program in my high school from other European countries. But yeah, I was never offered anything like that. And I think it's kind of sad.
I agree. I was never offered a program in high school, right? So going
Yeah.
through those 4 years, I never knew I had the opportunity to do that. And to my knowledge,
Yeah.
I didn't. But right, these like you were saying, and I got the chills when you were talking about it because I've had such similar emotions and feelings about these abroad experiences. But they really do change your life, and in your case so much so that here you go, you do a bit of time over there during college, and then you say, hey, you know what, this is awesome, I love this, keep going back, and now you've actually built your life over there, which
Yeah.
you never would have done, in my opinion, and correct me if I'm wrong, but had you not gone over there the first time and really experienced it for yourself, right?
Exactly. So just one thing I have to add to the story. So we did go abroad when I was in high school on a language exchange, but it was only for 2 weeks. So I did have that experience, but
Okay.
again, it was only because I took German. It was only because I decided to take the program. And it was offered as well for people speaking Spanish and French, I think. But then it was a little bit more hard to get into because more people speak Spanish and French than German, obviously. So German was the language in my high school that not so many people actually took. So I did have that 2 week experience. So it wasn't that we were not offered anything, because that obviously that trip was very life changing for me too, because I was so young. And it was, I mean, I always tell this story, but Berlin was the very first European city that I ever got to visit, and now I've been living here forever. So I had a short-term experience, but yeah, I think if I had had the year abroad, I think my German skills would just be even better. They're pretty good, but they're not perfect. And I think, yeah, I think the US could work on implementing more programs like that. And they're exchanges, so also taking children from other countries and giving them a chance to get to know our culture. I think that could be beneficial on both sides.
Definitely, yeah. Just the idea of an element of intercultural exchanges, it helps create more global-minded citizens, right? I think it helps foster a greater understanding, from one nation, between one nation and another. And
Hmm.
I think overall it leads to great benefits, like less hatred and violence and more peace, because people understand each other better.
Definitely. And I mean, I say this all the time. The more people I meet for my job, the more I realize we're all the same from the morals point of view and what we're trying to achieve in life. We might be doing it at different income levels, different positions, but yeah, the end goal is, to have a safe and happy person and family. And yeah. And
Right.
I think more intercultural exchange definitely encourages those kind of relationships and feelings about others. Yeah, definitely really important. Okay. I want to know more about Japan. So I think the cultural differences from the US to South America, they definitely exist, but they're not as big as from the US to Japan. So how was it?
Strikingly different,
Yeah.
drastically different, dropped
Yeah.
me upside down on my head. Never had this experience before. Different.
Wow. So how did you get introduced to Japan? Did you take some language courses first, or were you on a job offer? Did you take a How did you get to Japan?
Yeah, good question. None of the above.
Okay.
Um, so the story is as such. I was about 4 years old, and I told my mother I was going to speak Japanese. I don't even remember having this conversation with her, but she recently informed me of this, and I said, well, how fitting that I end up there one day and speaking it. Now, the actual logistics of what happened was, after my MBA, I had said, hey, I've done a lot of different kinds of trips and travel around to different parts of the world, but I had not been to Asia. So I thought to myself, let me go to Asia. I really want to explore and see a whole new area. And so part of the Asia trip ended up entailing Japan. It was the last of the countries I visited. I planned to be there for about a month and a half. Ended up there for 3 months. Was just blown away, fascinated, intrigued.
Wow.
It just was so different than any other place than I had ever been to. It was the closest to being on another planet I had ever. I
Yeah.
could say that being on Earth I've experienced,
Wow. I think
and I
that's
and I
cool
and I
that,
like that.
yeah. Well, I think it's cool that you had the opportunity. And so when you finished traveling, how did you get to stay? Because obviously there are visa requirements, and yeah, there had to be like a changeover from one to the other.
Yeah. So this is also an interesting element of the story. So I had made friends with various people just traveling around. I had made a Japanese friend in India, and
Hmm.
he connected me with his friend in Tokyo. He said, "Hey, when you go to Tokyo, let this guy know." So I became friendly with that guy. And during my time in Tokyo, he was very helpful. Um, and he became a good friend. And the opportunity, my interest in Japan grew, and I learned that I really was not going to be able to experience all that Japan had to offer within 3 months. And this was like more of a deeper feeling. Like, I want to come back here. I want to live here. I want to work here. I want to experience this country on another level. It led to investigating some different career opportunities. And I ended up borrowing my friend's suit, because I had a backpack, right? You could not you could not possibly fathom that I would be planning a backpacking trip and bringing a suit.
And the
So
clothes
I
that you've been
didn't.
wearing every day for 3 months that are very dirty and backpacker
Right.
style.
So I ended up borrowing his suit, going to an interview, and getting told that at that point in time, there was no definitive decision on it. And it wasn't
Okay.
until months later that the company contacted me and said, "Hey, we have an opening. Are you interested?" Was back in New York at that time, but indeed I was interested in going back.
Wow. So how did it work for an American wanting to go to work in Japan? Did you have to apply for a visa in the US at the embassy for Japan, or did you have to apply for a work permit first? Do you remember the process?
Um, yes, to a degree. Yes, it was several years ago, but my what I remember from it was that once I got the offer from the company, I had to take it to the Japanese embassy here in New York,
Okay.
and there was. I remember that there was a letter that the government had to issue.
Yeah, I think that could sound right.
Hmm. Um, and once I had this in hand, I was then able to go to the consulate, take care of the paperwork.
Hmm.
And it's funny because I didn't actually receive like my identification card until uh, entering the airport in Japan.
Oh,
And then
wow.
at that point in time, I received my identification.
Oh,
Um,
that's cool. So they had like a residence permit waiting for you in Japan at the airport.
right. Yeah.
So I definitely need to talk. That's super interesting, but I definitely need to talk to a Japan specialist because I want to know about that. I've never heard that before. So I'll have to find a Japanese destination services provider or immigration attorney to talk about those topics because I think that's interesting. I used to work for a company who we outsourced. We did immigration and we outsourced to. We did a couple of cases. We did a lot of cases to China, which was very complicated, and also a couple. I think we had once in a while to Thailand, and very low volume. But I never have heard about Japanese immigration and how it works. But I guess you'd have to have a lot of documents translated and stuff like that because if I don't know, your degrees were probably in English, they might have had to been translated into Japanese or certified or something like that. So I think that would be interesting to hear more about.
And one of the interesting things is, as I was leaving the country actually to relocate back to New York, the process was in the midst of changing. And I remember receiving something called My Number, which was essentially like a social security number. For
Right.
anyone not in the States, it's like our personal identification number, right?
Yeah.
So I was receiving one in Japan at
Okay.
that time. So I believe that all
Interesting.
foreigners were going to be receiving that from that point forward. And that would have been back in 2015, I believe they implemented that process. And I'm not sure if it's still in place or if it's
Okay.
not, it's changed.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Yeah, in Germany we have tax identification numbers. It's basically the closest thing we have to social security numbers, and
Okay.
it's important to remember them, because if you leave Germany and come back and you register yourself in another city, sometimes it's hard to get a hold of it or track it down. So yeah, that's a tip for Germany for anyone who's listening. If you once you get the number, make sure you have it documented well, because I assume if you go back to Japan, it could be maybe the same number, but I don't know. In some countries, I think they kind of turn off the number, and then you get a new one if you come back. So it probably depends on the country, but yeah, that's interesting that they gave you kind of a ID number. And so, how was working in Japan? What kind of position did you work in, and what kind of cultural differences did you encounter in that position?
Sure. Well, there were two positions. They were both in the realm of teaching English. The first of which was teaching English as an assistant language teacher in a middle school,
Uh-huh.
and the second position was teaching with Berlitz, which is a language learning solutions company.
Right.
They teach all languages, but I focused on English, and that there were um, yeah, both really interesting and really different experiences.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess if you teach English at the local level in a Japanese school, you probably have to follow a completely different curriculum than a language solutions company, because that company probably has a worldwide curriculum that they follow.
Exactly, and I'll build on that point. So in the middle school, it would be lesson planning. I would work with the different teachers that I was going to be co-teaching with, and we would put together the lesson plans, together, or they would ask my input, and I would give advice, right? And we would co-teach those classes together. Whereas in Berlitz, it was more a very structured system that
Hmm.
certain books, depending on the student's level and interests, like business or conversational, and the materials were more standardized. Um, Classes were generally one-on-one with Berlitz, but there were group classes too.
Hmm.
And I took on other endeavors, such as going out to companies and teaching there, teaching, English test preparation courses at universities, sort of
Hmm.
a study abroad immersion course actually at a university, which was very cool, presentation skills classes, a lot of different interesting things going on at Berlitz. And from two different experiences on a cultural level too, because Berlitz was more, my coworkers were other foreigners, um,
Right.
whereas in the middle school, that's where I got sort of hands-on access to a lot of these different cultural differences.
Yeah. And so when did you start your journey with learning the Japanese language? Were you picking up some of it because of your work, or did you take intensive courses, or how did you start that journey?
Yeah, no classes. Just
Wow.
straight up get in there and start speaking to people, and not able to speak to people until I'm able to start speaking to people.
Oh wow, I honestly think that's one of the best ways to learn a language, because I did take German classes in high school, and a couple of German classes over the years here in Berlin, and when I was an au pair and stuff like that. But the real reason why I speak German is because I was an au pair in Germany, and I had that experience. And I lived in a village with 200 people, so I had no choice. So I had to speak German, and obviously my partner's German. We've been together for 5 years, so that definitely didn't harm me at all to use the language. But I tell people all the time, you learn from speaking, not from learning how to write grammar. So for me, 100%, I believe that you can learn a language with immersion, and you definitely, and you learn more about the culture that way as well. There are definitely things you learn from speaking to people, getting to know locals, that you're never ever going to learn in a textbook.
Totally. And that's the main impetus behind the reason that I learn in the way that I do, because I'm curious about people. And this is relative to all the languages I've
Hmm.
learned, except for Spanish, which continued into this realm, but started in
Yeah,
school. But
right.
really just being able to understand people better, understand their culture, understand what they do and why they do it through their language. So that's fascinating to me. So That's why I just dive in there. Just say, hey, you know what? I'm going to make mistakes, and it doesn't matter, because to me, the goal is communicating. I can understand what you're saying, and you can understand what I'm saying. And if that doesn't happen immediately, we'll take the proper steps to ensure that eventually it happens, through different methods. And I would just like to point out to say that it's going to be the way that people learn languages is going to be dependent on their goals, right? So if my goal in these situations is to communicate, then I'm going to do it the way that I do. But someone, who may aim to teach it, to teach the subject at one point in time, they may find that very structured, classes and focusing on the grammar might be very important, for them to be able to teach, effectively learn and teach those rules.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely important, especially if someone wants to work it in the language, in the language for business purposes, or, if you want to study in the language because you want to make an exam or something like that. So those things are definitely important for those reasons, for certifications. But for me, the best still is immersion and speaking. That's how I feel. I feel personally integrated. My German grammar is not perfect. I still make mistakes sometimes. I know way less German grammar than I do conversational German, I would say. Yeah. And over the years, I've had more challenges with the grammar, I think, than being able to, but I think it's because I'm a person who can just talk. So like, I never had a problem to like walk into a room and speak horrible German and just try it out. And I'm guessing if you learn Japanese from speaking, you had the same experiences.
Yes, I was going to say kudos to you, Victoria, for going out of your comfort zone and just learning the language like that. I think this style of learning works well for folks who have similar personalities to yours and mine. We're outgoing,
Yeah.
just kind of fearless, just go out and just do it and not worry about. And I think a lot of what holds people back is, oh, what are people going to think if I make a mistake, or like, are they going to laugh at me? And that is okay, I can understand that concern, but my experience with this all over the world, multiple languages, is the amount of times somebody has laughed at my poor language skills. I can't even remember that ever happening.
Yeah.
It's been a sense of like astonishment and respect,
Yeah.
and like, they are so happy. These people are so happy. And this is a global phenomenon, right? This is
Yeah.
happening to me all over the world in the different languages. They're so happy that you're taking the time to try to communicate in their language. And it's an amazing thing. So I think while people fear making mistakes, they should embrace it, because we don't even speak our native tongue perfectly.
Yeah, that's true. And I think from a grammar perspective, Germans also don't write German perfectly all the time, especially when they're writing text messages and stuff like this. There are definitely some nuances there that they don't use, but in like legal German, it's very, very correct and complicated. So yeah, it's, of course it's important if you live here and you really want to feel integrated, to at least be able to half understand what's being sent in a German letter. But most Germans don't understand what's being said in a German letter either. So
It's interesting.
yeah, German legal jargon is a disaster. So yeah, I think there are other ways to learn the language and get speaking. And yeah, it helps being an outgoing person. And in Germany, obviously, it also helps that a lot of people speak English. How was it in Japan? Do a lot of Japanese people speak English?
So this is an interesting one. Yes, but depends where. So
Mm-hmm.
in the bigger cities, you're going to find more people who speak English. But one of the biggest barriers for people actually hearing English from Japanese people in Japan is cultural. And it's the fact that all regions of Japan, except for Osaka, in my experience, Japanese people are pretty shy. And
Okay.
so they're afraid to make mistakes generally. And combine that with the shy factor, and even if they do speak English, before you know it, they're coming out with apologies about how poor their English is,
Oh
and
yeah.
and so I feel like the confidence level is already generally lower, and
Mm-hmm.
and they're worried about making mistakes, and so sometimes they just say, I don't speak, or at first, what's interesting is actually one thing I misunderstood at first was that, because I've seen this sometimes, this X, right, this sort of X gesture in front of
Yeah.
the crossing the arms in front of the face, and sometimes I understood that to mean you know, maybe like we're closed in a shop, don't come in. But sometimes
Right.
I think it was referring to just like, sorry, I'm not comfortable communicating in English.
Right. Could be, definitely, like, yeah, and that could be a little bit unwelcoming, I think, and knock your own self-confidence a little bit as
Yeah.
well. So yeah, that would be interesting, I think. Yeah.
Now, and just to build on that point a little bit, so some of the work, I sort of dedicated my time in Japan, like my work and my effort was to really instilling a stronger sense of confidence in all these Japanese English speakers, from the middle school all the way up to folks who are retired, in both arenas of like teaching in the public sector and then
Mm-hmm.
teaching in the private sector. Part of what I was doing, of course, was teaching the language, was you know, instilling the confidence in them to speak it, to say, hey, look, you speak English a lot better than you think you do. Get out there, practice it. You're not going to get better if you don't speak it, listen to it, and everything. You're going to need to make mistakes to learn what you need to fix.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I think that's a good goal to have because I mean anyone can teach them English, but not everyone can see their challenges. And I think if being shy is a cultural thing, or more, yeah, introverted is a more cultural thing, then it definitely is good to encourage them more to use the languages, because yeah, if they have a native speaker available and someone, I don't know, is it normally like Americans or native English speaking people teaching English in Japan, or was that just a coincidence that you were doing that for that one middle school?
They're usually bringing in native speakers. I'm trying to think of where people from the States, from the UK. There were instances too. I met some people from the Philippines, and this was just yeah. And generally, the way it would work is in the middle school, a company would assign you to go be with that school for a year, but the Japanese year is split into trimesters even at the
Okay.
middle school level. So
Hmm.
somebody could, if someone had an emergency or someone had to leave, they might swap in somebody in the a new trimester, but generally they like to have people there for a year.
Okay. That's interesting. And how was it like with the Japanese, like making friends with Japanese people? Do your colleagues invite you to their homes, or do you have to make local friends, or how does it work in Japan?
So you're almost never going to somebody's house.
Okay.
Yeah. No, that's not always. And I would say like the times I did go hang out at friends' houses, those were the friends I made actually. One of my friends who I made in Cambodia. So people who have traveled and been exposed to new
Right.
viewpoints and sort of international experiences are more open to the idea. And I won't say never, but I'll say it's definitely less common because it's seen as a more private space, and Japanese people in a lot of ways, my experience, are pretty private people.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so the act of making friends was indeed challenging. Um,
Okay.
and I think a lot of that's because of the private nature of the people, but also just Japanese people are so polite, which is such a wonderful quality. Um, it can be challenging too because you're not sure. You may not be sure when you first meet somebody, when you start to develop a relationship, how deep the friendship really is. You know, and because it's hard to have those deep conversations. I found it
Right.
extremely difficult to have those like deep conversations with people
Yeah.
about
So
life,
that's,
about relationships, and these things.
yeah. So I find it easy to have conversations with Germans about all different topics, but obviously I'm basically German now, so maybe it's a little different for me now. But it's similar in Germany that for example, when I was growing up in the US, it was very common that my mom's colleagues were friends with her, and we were invited to a baby shower if they're having a baby, or even to one of their weddings. That was very common. We also I remember one of my mom's friends, they had a swimming pool, and we would go to their house and have barbecues and stuff like that. So in my family, that was normal. And I think it's just an American thing. You sometimes do things with your colleagues. It's coworkers. It's normal. And in Germany, that's not as normal, I would say. I think things are changing a little bit, and I also live in Berlin, where there's a big startup culture, so things could be different because it's a city and things are more social. But I would say normally you don't hang out with your colleagues, or you don't really invite them to your house. It's family and friends, and work are separate.
So it's interesting to hear that, because I would make the distinguishment that on the level of just friends in Japan, some of the challenges I experienced were what I was talking about before. And this concept of hone and tatemae, which hone means your true self, like your
Okay.
inner self, and your tatemae is your statue, if you will. It's your outer
Oh,
guise. And so just the fact that the Japanese language has these two words in it, it tells you something pretty
yeah.
interesting, that there's a strong difference between someone's true self and the self that society sees, the polite, respectful, get along with everybody to make community run properly. And so breaking that was the biggest challenge with the friendship, was I think breaking through that tatemae and getting into the hone, getting into the true self of the person.
Yeah.
I feel like I was really only able to do that with a few people. Uh, However, on the side of coworkers, like from the work perspective, it may surprise you, but it was very different. There was a lot of interaction with coworkers. There was a lot of not going to their homes so much,
Okay.
but going out together for drinks or for ramen. This is a very, very common and actually integral point.
Okay.
It's necessary to do this with your Japanese colleagues in order to foster a sense of community and to really build those relationships, because it really is just such a relationship oriented culture. It's very important to do that.
Oh, that's really okay. That's interesting. But I think, well, maybe that also has to do with the fact that I think Japanese people work quite a bit, right? They're hard workers and they work
Yes.
long hours, and so I think if they don't socialize with these people, they won't have it. They won't have much of a social life, maybe. So that might be
Yeah.
part of it.
Yeah. The hours were crazy. I mean, I would have students late at night who would come exhausted or not even make it to lessons sometimes. And we're talking about like 7, 8 at night. And
Oh
I mean,
wow,
it's not uncommon for Japanese folks to work super late.
that's crazy. Yeah, I think those are interesting cultural perspectives that we talked about. So, moving from Japan, tell me a little bit how you moved or how you got into the global mobility branch.
Sure. So after my experience in Japan, when I relocated back to um, the States,
Hmm.
um, I had gotten into contact. Well, actually, during my time in Japan, I had gotten into contact with a cross-cultural training firm, because as I was teaching English, I was thinking to myself, well, I really want to, as I'm having all these impactful cultural exchanges with the students and really understanding their culture better and having them understand mine, I realized that I really do have this passion for this intercultural world.
Right.
And I happened to come across a company, which was DFA, Dean Foster Associates, it was called at the time. It later was bought by Dwellworks.
Okay.
And so I got into contact with this company and learned that they were, looking for program managers to manage their intercultural training programs.
Hmm.
And it seemed very interesting. And at the time I had a couple conversations, but I wasn't ready to move back yet. But lo and behold, at the time, eventually, shortly after I did relocate back to the States, there was an open position and I was offered it and I took it.
Wow. Cool. Very good. And so actually I'm interested in knowing more about intercultural trainings because I have been working in global mobility, I think for something like 6 years now. And I've seen a lot of different kinds of relocation packages, but I have never seen a cultural training be authorized for any of my expats ever. So I'm wondering who's authorizing those kind of packages. You don't have to tell me the client's names. I know that's that a privacy thing, but I'm just wondering what kind of companies are doing that, and for is it really for VIPs or high level people, or also for entry level or assignments? Who's who's offering their expats cultural trainings, intercultural trainings, and who's participating in them?
Great question, Victoria. We often see larger companies offering, we see a whole gambit, but we see a lot of larger companies offering this service. And I think it's largely due to the fact that the budget, there are bigger budgets for these. And as you mentioned, a lot of times, you're just not seeing people offer cross-cultural training, which I think is a huge problem and a huge mistake that companies are making. They really need to understand the long-term benefits. A lot of companies are thinking in the short term and saying,
Right.
hey, we need to authorize shipment of household goods. We need to authorize flights. And I think that's totally valid and that's true. They need a plane to get them there. They need housing once they arrive, but they also need to understand, they need some kind of training to understand their culture, so they're not just dumbfounded and they're not just
Yeah.
completely shocked, and they have some sort of framework and understanding of how to deal with it. um,
Right.
but I digress. So it's these larger companies generally,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not just VIP. It's definitely VIP folks, but it's
Mm-hmm.
also managers and even folks on the individual contributor level that are
Mm-hmm.
moving for different roles. I think we see a variety in terms of that.
Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, I think I honestly think that every single one of my expats needs an intercultural training. And it's just little things like, I mean, obviously the topics that I'm helping with are very emotional because they're moving to a new country for the first time. They have to deal with a lot of bureaucracy. I'm the person facilitating the bureaucracy, but especially when it comes to home search, I haven't had anyone like try to do anything illegal or like lose their cool while doing home search, but home search is really difficult in Berlin. And I've had expats ask me things before like, yeah, but Victoria, can't we just offer them more money to try and get the apartment? And when they asked me that, I was thinking deep down inside, I was like, what? Why would we do that? That's not, I mean, it's offered on the internet for a price and that's what you pay. But in their country, that's what you do. You go to the viewing, you offer more money and you get the apartment. And that's just, you made a bid for it basically. So it's not that crazy that you don't, it's not that crazy for them to say that, like, can we pay a little more rent so we get the apartment? And they were not suggesting bribery or anything like that. But I also sometimes wonder, how many other countries that you kind of can pay your way into getting an apartment, whereas in Germany that's completely crazy. um, I mean, there is a system in which you can pay a real estate agent. The real estate agent can help you find an apartment, but that's a completely different situation I'm speaking of. And there are other things as well. For example, in Germany, how property management companies, government offices, they don't like when you write like 10 emails with 10 different questions. They prefer that you ask as few questions as possible and you ask them in one email. And I sometimes have clients that come back with like this many questions, and it's like, asking these questions is not going to change the situation. I know they have to be as informed as possible, and I really do try to do everything for them, but I also have to try to explain to them, I know you have a lot of questions, but can we consolidate them? Can we send in one email? Because I try not to annoy the German, the Germanness of the context we're working with. And I sometimes wish that even the startups or the local companies here hiring engineers would also try and give these kind of cultural trainings to learn more about like local German culture, because it's definitely challenging to try and explain to a person you're being annoying to the German person.
Exactly. Well, I think you make a couple really good points there. I mean, one, not understanding the German culture that, hey, we're really not trying to offer more money for an apartment because that's just not how it's done here. And having
Right.
and having the understanding of the German culture, of the directness, the
Exactly.
efficiency,
Right.
and people aren't trying to answer 10 different emails with like 10 different questions, but like somebody coming from a culture where that's okay and the
Normal.
norm, well, they wouldn't even see uh, they wouldn't even see what they're doing as a potential cultural challenge or something that's causing a rift, whereas
Yeah.
it is. um,
Yeah.
and I think that's where the value of the cultural training comes in, and it also
Hmm.
goes to like a deeper level of understanding individualist versus collectivist, like these different values that society, where you're going to, um, may value that where you're coming from may not. It might be very
Right.
different. It might be the same or similar, or it might be drastically different. So it's important to understand these sort of um, deeper elements of culture too.
Yeah, maybe that would even be helpful for me. So I actually studied intercultural conflict management. So we had some intercultural trainings within the studies as well. We had some intercultural trainers come in and give us some different tasks to do, and it was a while ago. And of course, when you're in the middle of the heat of doing an apartment search or trying to explain a certain process, you forget about these things that you learn in the trainings. And maybe I should also refresh myself and read a book or watch some YouTube videos or something like that about intercultural
Well,
communication.
it's interesting. It's interesting you say that because I recently had a conversation where um, it was about how everybody in the process should be educated, and I agree with that. You know,
Definitely.
just like everyone from the destination service providers to the people helping with the home search to the folks, you know, coordinating the trainings. Of course, everybody should really have cultural understanding of the person they're dealing with. I think the challenge that we see there um, is that people are coming from so many different cultures and
Yeah.
countries to for example for with you to Germany.
Yeah.
It's sort of easier for us to like train the person who's going in Germany
True.
that's where they're going versus trying to train the German person or like the expat like yourself in how many cultures are we going to train them, because are they
So
coming from
many, yeah.
India and the US and Japan and China, um, which which then makes the argument potentially, which is interesting for the global citizen. Is there a way we can train people that like could someone could just do everything? I don't know,
Yeah,
you know, but
that's a good
uh,
question. I mean, I studied politics. I studied political science before I did intercultural, my master's degree in intercultural conflict management. So I feel like when we studied political science, there was always a way to learn about different governments, at least the general form of the government. So maybe there's a way, there's a way to at least learn about regions, or yeah, you can't, of course, you cannot apply these cultural things to all clients because I mean, you know that too now because you've lived abroad for a long time. People who travel and people who live abroad are different than people who have never left their country or never been abroad. So I can get someone, if I get an expat, for example, who has freshly come from their country, or one who has lived in the US for a few years and then came to Germany from the same exact country, the difference in those two people is like really crazy. Because someone who's lived abroad already, they know like everything that you tell them, somebody already told them something similar in another country, so they're not surprised or shocked by it. Whereas someone who just moved abroad for the first time, they've never lived without their parents, they have to pay so much rent, they have to pay all these bills, they're like they're completely shocked. So yeah, they're definitely, I think that what you said before about learning about like individualist versus collective societies and stuff like that, that would definitely be beneficial for me because sometimes I don't know why the clients are asking me certain questions or why they behave a certain way. Yeah, but then again, you can't always use these labels because a few years ago I was helping a couple of people from China and I had worked with Chinese people before, so I assumed um, that my Chinese clients would be super shy and they wouldn't speak the greatest English, and then that was not the case at all. They're super outgoing with me. They spoke English. They had a very good sense of humor, and both of the girls that I helped, they were from a big city in China, so that definitely helped a lot. And they were it was a complete opposite of the Chinese people I had worked with before, but the Chinese people I had worked for before, they were working in a company in a remote village. So yeah, it's city people versus village people, so it's hard to compare, put labels on all Chinese people, for example.
that's a good point, right? People are gonna be different based on the experiences they've had, whether it's in a rural environment or an urban
Definitely.
environment. And like you were saying before, just if they've been abroad or not before, they're gonna have a. I've also noticed very different characteristics in people of
Yeah.
those two categories.
Yeah, definitely. And so what about you? I think you told me last week that you just finished your certification to be an intercultural trainer yourself?
Yeah, recently got certified to be a trainer. Yes, which is great because there's like you know all the materials you need,
Mm-hmm.
um, method in place, and just yeah, great structure to it.
Yeah, that's cool. And have you had a chance already to give some trainings, or did you finish right when COVID was starting, or?
Right into COVID. Boom.
Okay, so I don't know if people do intercultural trainings online, but they will probably start doing that if they're not
They do,
already.
and that's an interesting point too. They do. Online programs are actually growing in popularity even before
Mm-hmm.
COVID because of the cost. You know, cross-cultural training and just costs in general. Companies are
Right.
always looking at it. What's the ROI? How can I justify this cost? Well,
Mm-hmm.
online trainings are traditionally they can be cheaper than in person. And some of the other things that are that companies may realize or think about is when they're thinking about having a cross-cultural training, oftentimes the company will pay for the travel, how the intercultural trainer gets there if they're from out of town, potentially like, the airplane,
Oh yeah.
the hotel, and those costs are just eliminated if it's an online training.
Right. But yeah, I've been watching a lot of things online lately too. And I think this whole situation is going to be like that for every sector because people,
Yeah.
I mean, companies are going to start to realize that you don't need an office space because everyone's getting more work done at home.
Right. Like,
Then,
why are we paying thousands of dollars for an office when
yeah,
we're getting the same stuff done here?
I think that things are going to change a lot. I think yeah, people are going to try and cut costs as much as possible because they're going to see people are more effective when they have the, the opportunity to choose how and where they work. And yeah, definitely. I'm definitely thinking things are going to change a lot and that we're going to have more information about that in the next few years.
And now the challenge is, right, cost cutting, and with this increased, we're going to see increased levels of technology and a lot
Mm,
of companies just looking to do online solutions, and that's fine and that's efficient. But I know myself, I definitely feel like oftentimes I can have a very strong, if not greater, impact with an in-person conversation.
definitely.
You
That's
know,
me too.
yeah, rather than a virtual. So that's still like personality-wise my preferred method.
Yeah.
But I can certainly work with the other way, and I can understand why folks would want to do it that way.
Yeah. Sometimes when I first get a case and I'm trying to get through to the client and I'm not getting through, of course I'll go back to the relocation company if that's the case, and I'll tell them like, or the employer, and I'll tell them like, hey, we're having A, B, and C challenge, and often the relocation consultant's like, have you met them in person yet? And I'm like, well, I haven't had the chance to yet. And they're like, well, do it. Because that sometimes really just makes a difference. Once they see me and they see I'm friendly and warm, then getting to know me and I can tell them a little bit about my story, that I'm also an expat. Then they start to realize, okay, this person is a person I like and can connect with them way better than if I'm just like writing them and being like, please give me all these documents. Please do this. Please do that.
Exactly. And like you
Yeah,
said, email communication is very different than in person. And you're like, this warm, fun, sweet person. And but potentially you have a lot of emails to write, so you're typing quickly, and then
exactly.
you're in like
Robot.
the thinking of like German efficiency mode, right?
German
I'm gonna
Victoria.
yes, I'm gonna answer quickly, and someone may perceive that culturally as
Definitely.
being short with them, but when they get on the phone, it's like, oh, okay, and then when they meet you in person, it's like, oh, well, this is like, I love her, but they wouldn't know that,
Yeah,
they don't draw that kind of connection until it's the in-person connection is there.
definitely.
Right.
Very good. So, you also told me that you have been to more than 50 countries. Was that the right number? 50?
50 is the magic number right now.
Wow, that's so crazy because I have traveled quite a bit, but I haven't never been to Asia. So I think I'm like between 30, think I told you last week, 35 and 40. Have a good amount of number or a good number. But yeah, I would like to know a little bit more about your other projects which are related to traveling.
Sure. So a lot of the personal travel experiences were just sort of burning desire to just get out there and learn about the world, learn about different cultures and people. And so I did a 5-week road trip with a friend across the US, did a 3.5-monther throughout South America. I did 14 and a half months through Asia, 2 months straight traveling, and a bit of extras here and there through Europe, and recently completed a 7-month world trip. And that's
Oh,
been sort of that's
wow.
like the bulk of the countries I've seen have been on these long journeys.
Right.
I call them outside of the classroom learning experiences because that is exactly what they are.
Definitely, definitely. I mean, I did a little bit of backpacking through Europe, but like on a small scale. So I only did like 2 weeks at a time and I only did a handful of countries at a time. So I haven't had that experience. But yeah, I definitely know a little bit about like solo travel as well, like having to plan, like think on the go where you're going to next and what you're planning and which next hostel you're staying in. I couldn't imagine doing that for a long period of time. What you learn about yourself, to be honest.
Well, I'm actually writing a book about it, which is because I felt like I've been so fortunate to gain all this knowledge over the course of,
Yeah.
10, 15 years. And I really want to share with the world what I've learned about the world, what I've learned about myself, and all these amazing ways that travel changes us. And just to want to make one point, that COVID is really, this whole situation has really allowed me to step back and take a bird's eye view of things and really sort of assess the importance of travel and moving forward. You know, how do I want to travel? What
Hmm.
kind of experiences do I want to have? Less so ticking boxes. And so, what I would say to everyone out there listening, it's really less about, for me, it's less. I know a lot of people tend to go by statistics or numbers, and it's sort of just, you know, okay, 50 countries and traveling for like over 7 months, and that's just because I've been fortunate enough to save up for these experiences to make them happen. And this is the way I wanted to do it, but that is not the way that everybody wants to do it. And so even
Exactly.
somebody who's been to 5 states, that's impressive to me. Somebody who's been
Hmm.
to 5 countries, and has traveled for even 1.5 weeks, because I think to me it's more about, where did you go? What kind of experiences did you have? Rather than how many places have you been, and how long were you traveling, and these kind of things.
Yeah. Yeah, I also like sometimes I hate the fact that I even count which how many countries I've been going to, because I also went like for example, I've been to Spain probably like 10 times. But it's only one country, but I've been to so many different cities in Spain and seen so many different things, and I always go back. And yeah, it's not about the number, it's more about the fact that like I have friends in Spain, I went to their wedding in Spain, and I know
Right.
their family, and their family comes to us once a year for the Christmas markets in Germany. And yeah, the experiences definitely change you. And I can say, living abroad for so long, I'm glad that I have, access to European friends and their families, and feel very lucky for that. Um, yeah, the experiences, I wouldn't trade them for the world. But one thing I find challenging is, I mean, it's the same with expats who have been abroad before. It seems to be that there's Americans who study abroad and Americans who travel, and then the ones that don't. And I find it hard to share my travel experiences or my travel abroad with other Americans. And because of that, I think when I first came to Europe, I also wasn't that interested in meeting other Americans or getting to know other Americans. But a few years ago, I helped some Americans relocate, and then we became really good friends, because I started to miss kind of like the spontaneity of having American people around me. And I miss something about Americans. But on the other hand, I still find it hard sometimes to talk to my American friends about my travels, or actually I don't talk to them about them at all because they're not that interested in them.
Yeah, I could totally relate to that.
Yeah.
Just feeling a similar experience with that whole idea, right? And sort of what I learned, I remember from my study abroad experience, I wanted to initially not interact with any Americans because I wanted to solely immerse myself in the culture.
Yeah.
And then I felt like after a while that got really exhausting.
Right.
And like only speaking the language,
Yeah.
like Spanish. But then and then I went through a phase where like I only hung out with the Americans in the programs, and then it was sort of like the cultural shift of like, you love the culture, you hate it, and then you level
Yeah.
out. But it was like that with like going
What do
hard with the
what do
language,
they
and
call
then
that? Isn't there a word for that? Like
like
the
um
honeymoon, or there's different phases, right?
it was the honeymoon phase, and then sort of the downward spiral, and then you're
Yeah.
back, and sort of yeah, just the cultural cultural immersion, or the cultural shift.
Yeah.
Um, that takes place, culture shock, if you will.
Yeah.
And yeah, no, but to your point, the disconnect has been something I've noticed too, with just as we spoke a little bit about before too, maybe because of American cultural values. But I don't have many friends who travel extensively, or
Hmm.
who really, I guess, go out to seek out these sort of learning experiences across the world. I have friends who really appreciate the travel they've done, and love to go on vacation, but I can relate to your point in that there
Yeah.
just is something different about it.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
funny. I think I have to look more into that. I'm sure there's cultural values behind it, or I don't know. Americans, I feel like Americans also like to save their money for different kinds of trips. Like a lot of them prefer more all-inclusive types of trips, or they like to go to very touristic places like Disney or Las Vegas, because those are like American dream type of things. And those are the materialistic things that we're sold our entire lives. And I think those are, yeah, it's just part of our culture. And I think that's awesome too. And I also had those experiences in my life, but I wish more families would realize if the amount of money that you spend to go to Disney for a week, you could spend and go to Europe for 3 weeks probably. So I think people are also just think it's really expensive, or they're afraid of coordinating it, but it's not so difficult. And I think I've done a lot of budget traveling. I almost always budget travel.
Yeah, same.
So you can stay in hostels, you can stay in apartments with kitchens, you can cook your own food still. And yeah, I think, of course, we cannot generalize. Not all Americans do not travel. We know that there's tons of Americans who love traveling. They love Europe. They backpack too. But yeah, it's just I have less friends that are interested in that than I do European friends, I would say.
Yeah, and you make a good point. There's nothing wrong with a Disney vacation. I think that's great, especially for families with kids, and
Yeah.
that's lovely. Kids are going to love that, and it's definitely worth doing. But there is sort of maybe, as you say it, I think about it, maybe there's a focus on that, or like all-inclusive vacations. Once again, there's nothing wrong with that.
Convenience. Our society is also a lot about convenience, and also about like service. And I mean, you can get good service in a European restaurant too, in a European hotel too, but that's not what the experience is about. And I feel like if you go to like a Disney resort, you know that it's all about the service and the show, and they know everyone's going to have a good time because that's what they paid for. So it's just, yeah, it's just going for what you know and what you're used to, I think.
Right. So it's uncommon that we see people just setting out on a journey, and maybe worldwide, but especially in the States, just being like, yeah, I'm getting out of here. I'm just going to buy a one-way ticket. See you later, mom. This is what I did. She thought it was crazy. The whole world thought it was crazy. But it's rare because people don't like that generally.
Yeah,
It's scary, right? You're just going to go land somewhere and figure it out. What do you mean? Well, I
yeah.
mean exactly what I said. I'm going to go land somewhere and figure it out. But actually
Yeah.
doing that is it's harder than saying that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's definitely been challenges traveling over the years. I mean, you miss a flight, or you or you I don't know, you get to the place and haven't booked something and don't find something, and you have no internet, and there are a lot of things that are challenging about it. But that's the whole point. You get put in a situation to think outside of the box, to think on your feet. And that's what makes it, I don't know, for me, that's what makes travel fun. And the people you meet along the way are also cool. Then you add them on Facebook and you see where they're traveling, and sometimes you meet them again in another place. And yeah, that's the life I like about, that's the part I like about traveling.
Oh, totally, and that's what a lot of the book talks about. That I'm writing about the skills you gain from traveling, what you learn about yourself, the
Right.
amazing experiences you have, and the people that you connect with, and that you stay in touch with, that you never would have known existed on this earth otherwise.
Yeah, definitely. That's so cool. So you also have a website, and it's a blog, right?
So my website is multifaceted. It is
Okay.
sort of a motivational oriented website. There's also
Hmm.
a blog on my ideas, which I've been writing in every week. And there
Okay.
is a travel blog too, which details everything after the Europe trip, because at that point in time, people were like asking about the travel, saying, well, what'd you do? What'd you do? And I realized that it was much more efficient just to put all the information in one spot on a
Yeah.
blog, where instead of sending out tons of emails to everyone. And that's how that started.
Cool.
Um, so yes, it is. It's my name, www.robmaisel, ROBMAISEL as in leopard.com. And from there, you've got your homepage, and then you've got Rob's blog is about my ideas. There's the travel blog, which is all, the last thing on there is the world trip before COVID hit.
Hmm.
And so that has not been updated because I have been going nowhere but New York City recently.
Yeah. Cool. So I will definitely link the website. And I think you have a site for the book as well.
Yes. So when COVID started, the idea was, hey, you know what? I understand people are going through a lot of things right now, and it's difficult. I want to be a positive source of motivation. And I know that people aren't um, particularly traveling right now, but people now more than ever are getting really gung-ho, really excited about travel. So I said to myself, well, I'm going to write this book to show people about the amazing benefits of travel, and I'm going to invite them onto this journey with me of writing the book. So I've been allowing people to receive weekly updates.
Cool.
This landing page that I created,
Hmm.
people pop in just their first name and their email, and they're able to receive these weekly updates on how the book is progressing, and they get to feel like they're on this journey with me writing the book.
That's awesome. I think it's cool that you created those resources as well, because um, sometimes when someone starts a new project, you don't hear about it until they finish the project. And if you're along for the ride, you're more interested in the final outcome. And I think that's really cool that you started the landing page and then kind of newsletter about your book.
Well, thanks. Yeah, it's twofold, really. It's like I want to get people amped up and excited about this journey and this book, and by doing so, I'm receiving this amazing support. Like, now I know
Yeah.
I have a whole bunch of people waiting to hear from me by the end of the week to see what I've been up to, right? So it holds me accountable,
Yeah.
and which is a big thing here too, and why I
Hmm.
did that. But it motivates me too because I know I have a group of people that are really learned all about this now. They're going through the process with me, and they're excited to see the finished product.
Very cool. Very cool. I think it's so cool that you're working on so many different projects. And yeah, I wish you a lot of luck with the finishing of your projects.
Thank you.
Um, so I think this is going to be my last question, and it is:
Okay.
what is your favorite thing about being able to work with internationals?
It's a good one. Um, now we talk about, are we talking just about like diverse groups of people? We're talking about expats who are
Yeah, I
working.
would. Yeah, I would say, since the podcast is a global mobility podcast, I would say working with internationals on a business perspective in the global mobility world.
I think really the diversity of cultures and viewpoints
Mm,
and perspectives, and that's what I really enjoy about working just with people of different backgrounds, is really learning to view situations from new angles and then reassessing my own view on the situation and sort of rewiring, like rethinking about, trying to think about it how they would think about it,
right.
and then okay, processing the information in a new way.
Yeah, and I think today you also, like, even sitting here talking to you, just because you threw in a couple of your terms, I think that you probably collected in your intercultural training certification. You also gave me some ideas on how I can, improve my own service delivery by, just taking some time to learn more about the different types of cultures my clients are coming from, and to understand their point of view. I'm definitely going to take that with me and look at some more resources, because there are definitely some countries which I work better with than other countries, and I would really like to understand those ones that I have challenges with a little bit better. That's definitely a takeaway from today.
That's awesome. And I find one of the best ways to do that is just to be curious, because a lot
Yeah,
of times in life we don't even realize we're doing it, but we assume, you know,
true.
w- we get some like email that like might have like two question, three questions, and like each one ends in like two or three question marks. One of them has an exclamation point. We assume this person is either crazy or angry, or but actually maybe they're just really stressed and nervous. So just,
Right.
and there could be cultural factors in play that we don't understand. So just by being curious and asking, is there a reason why, or I'm just curious to better understand X, Y, and Z. I've found that, especially when dealing across cultures, to be extremely helpful.
Right. Well, thank you so much for that. And I'm definitely going to look
Sure.
into your blog, because I love to travel, and I definitely want to know how you did those long trips and how you prepared for them and your challenges along the way. So I'm definitely happy to have that as a new resource for when I'm preparing travel. And good luck with your book. The very, very last question is, my podcast is called Relocrazy. So I want to know what makes you crazy about global mobility or intercultural communication. Why did you choose this path?
Sure. That's a great question. So really, the path here is just the right way forward because it allows me to utilize everything that I've learned from these personal and professional related experiences in relating to travel, languages, and cultures,
Right.
and just really be able to better understand the world, tweak my own viewpoints, and just make a global impact.
Yeah. Well, that's really powerful. I think that's really good. And I think everyone I've talked to so far, I think we're all somehow very similar because we all are staying in the, I think we stay in the global mobility branch because it keeps us on our toes a little bit. But I think deep down inside, the reason why we really stay in it, or some people even leave and come back, is just because in different sectors, maybe you don't get to deal with as many, intercultural situations. It can become boring quickly once you've been in this fast-paced sector. So I think that's powerful what you said, to have a global impact. I'll have to remember that when I'm doing my work, that I am having a global impact.
Yeah, even it may feel small, like on a small scale, sometimes day to
Yeah,
day, answering emails or like showing someone where they have to get this or that identification, but you are making a huge impact on that person and on the community and on the world, because don't forget, whatever this person learns and does, they take that with them back to their home country or to the next country they relocate, right? So whatever they've learned
definitely.
from you carries on to other people as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I do try, I mean, at the end of the day, I do try and sell Germany as much as possible, because in the beginning, there are not a lot of things which can be sold. Like, I'm like, oh, the immigration office is very difficult. Not always, but can be difficult. The city registration process, which we have when you get here, can also be difficult. Opening a bank account, okay, it's all right. But I'm like, you have to do X, Y, and Z. You have to send me thousands of documents, and you have to pay way too much in taxes. And they're all, I think at some point they're like, why did I even come here? But I
They're like,
always,
it's all great.
yeah. But I always stop and I tell them, listen, um, once you get into the system and you are here and you start a family here, or even if you're an individual, you are always supported from the state, more or less. So in my own experience, I was on unemployment when I started my business, and the German government helped me to start my business. I'm a foreigner, and the German government helped me to start my business. And it doesn't have to do, in this country, it doesn't really have to do with being a foreigner at the end of the day. It has more to do with, you paid into the system. Now we're going to help you out because you paid into the system. And I've seen the same with the COVID situation, is even people who normally wouldn't be able to apply for social benefits. I'm not talking about unemployment now. I'm talking about like welfare benefits.
Okay.
Even who wouldn't normally be allowed to because they're foreigners, if they lost their jobs, the immigration office, they posted a new decree as soon as COVID started getting crazy and people started losing their jobs and stuff like that, that even they can apply for these social benefits, and it won't affect their residence permits. And that is a really big step forward, I think, and that shows a lot about how Germany can be beneficial. So yeah, I try and sell it as much as possible.
That's nice. And I also think it's good that you're doing what I learned to be called from my Berlitz days, signposting, which is you're sort of
Yeah,
letting them know, and that's important for someone going into any kind of new learning a language or coming into a new culture. Just they're going to be experiencing a new process. Just sort of telling them, here's what you can expect, like A, B, and C. Like I know that if this is, so starting off by saying, like, I know this is going to be a little overwhelming. There's a lot of processes and procedures. I'm here to remind you. I'm not expecting you to remember everything, but just remember, once we get through A, B, C, D, and E, we got to work hard now, and then you'll feel the benefits down the road. Kind
definitely.
of deal.
Yeah, that's definitely a skill we have to use in our area for sure. Robert, thank you so much for all of the tips today, and I'm really excited to see the results of all of your projects. Let us know when you get up and running with your intercultural trainings. And yeah, thank you for being on the show today.
Thanks so much for your time today. It was a pleasure being on your show, Victoria, and we'll
Yeah,
certainly stay in touch.
and let us know when you get to phase 2.
Will do.
Very good. Thank you very much. Have a great day.
You too.